This film was long. It was very long. It was too long.
Yeah.
I thought that there were too many kind of twists and turns and things like that. And what was this? About a 3-hour film, 2 hours and 56 minutes or something like that. Can we just not make tight, short films anymore? Like, can you just not make a sub 2 hour like epic? Is this just not possible anymore? Like, I don't understand the logic of this. Let's talk a little bit about this. Why is this film as long as it is?
Well, there was some frustrating screenwriting inefficiency in this movie. Particularly, and usually when I say that, I'm talking about like in a mechanic level, but I'm actually speaking sort of more thematically, which is to say that like it felt like this movie had like sort of three big themes going on, sort of like this idea of like lies and how lies are necessary to create society, but what's the degree to which but there can be too many, whereas too many, like where's that line? This idea of vengeance versus hope, and this sort of idea of kind of like fear and sort of and just like what a broader question of sort of like what constitutes a good society, what constitutes a real like well constructed world or whatever. And it seems like the movie can only talk about one of those things at a time, even though they're very related. And so we end up having multiple scenes to sort of like get into like the questions of personal history and fear versus hope and lies and whatever, when a lot of those things can just get talked about all at the same time. And so it ends up having sort of some, like there are scenes with Alfred that are very much about like the question of like, oh, that's the other theme, is sort of like how we narrativize our own lives.
Yes.
And like we fantasize about people we don't know. And so there's like Alfred scenes where like, that's what we're talking about. And we're not talking about fear into the city, and we're not talking about hope and vengeance. And then we have other scenes with Selena Kyle. We're talking about hope and vengeance. We're not talking about personal historicity, and we're not talking about lies and the construction of society. And it's like, they can only talk about one thing at once. So if they want to get all their shit in, then they have to have more scenes. And that's one of the movie's big failings to me, I think, is that you're trying to make this like taut mystery, but people keep having to have these long meandering conversations about like ideas, which is fine in a different kind of movie, but it doesn't really work here, especially when the mystery's clues aren't even like that tricky. There are a bunch of them that Batman solves because like the guy who's supposed to solve them is like just okay at their job instead of above average, and Batman's like a little smarter than your regular guy.
There's a great
He's like,
scene where Jim Gordon goes, "Oh, I've got one of the Riddler's Hallmark cards here. It says, what's kind of like a rat but has wings and hangs in a cave and has fangs and bites people and flies around. I can't make heads or tails of it. What about you, Batman?" And then Batman takes 15 minutes to figure it out. It's like, and here's, so I'm not, like I said, not a big comic book guy. Michael, I know that you are. To me, isn't the notion that I get from the Riddler, not only in this film, but my sort of popular understanding of him, is that the riddles aren't supposed to be hard. It's the truths that he's revealing are hard, right? That he's kind of trying to point you towards acknowledging very uncomfortable truths that are right in front of you, right?
That, or that solving the riddle is a series of, that the real riddle is why he's asking you to solve all these riddles, and that the answer is to lure you into some sneaky trap. It's one of those two arrangements, but usually, yeah.
Especially in this film, it seems like the former, that he's trying to illustrate a point, and he's just doing it in a very theatrical manner. So it is weird to me every time they pick one of these, like, they pick up one of these fucking cards, and they have to spend an hour and a half scratching their heads over it. I'm like, is that really I don't feel like the point of the movie is solving riddles. I mean, so much so that there's the scene where he comes down and Alfred is working on the cipher, and he goes, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I'm working on this cipher." "How are you doing it?" "Well, I'm looking for these letters. I'm looking for double symbols, blah, 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 blah." Goes through, like, cipher or code cracking 101, whatever.
Get some good cryptography.
Yeah, and then 2 minutes later, Batman goes, "Oh, I put it into a computer, and actually that dog won't hunt. We're looking for a shape. We're not looking for what the actual letters mean." And it's just like, oh, okay, cool. Like, it's just one of those things of, like, every single time the movie's like, pay attention to the puzzle, and then it just completely dispenses with that 2 minutes later, and it's like, yeah, you could have cut some of this shit out.
Yeah, it's very crazy. Like, the he lies still one, I was like, anytime your movie has a riddle, and I solve the riddle, like, a scene before the movie does, like, you fucked up. Like, that's like, especially because I'm like not good at riddles.
What's a rat with wings? Is it a penguin? It's like, I know this is supposed to be like New York City, but fucking rats are not the size of penguins, sir. That's like a dog with wings.
A bat, a rat.
A bat or
Yeah,
a pigeon?
a pigeon, a seagull, seagulls. It could be anything.
And
Yeah.
and it gets to the point too where like this is. Oh, sorry to cut you off. What were you gonna say?
No, go ahead. No, go
No,
ahead.
all I was one of the things that I genuinely love about this movie that it just doesn't lean into, it doesn't turn the crank quite hard enough, is that I think genuinely Batman's kind of like a fuck up in this. I like that's the one
rules.
sort of subversive aspect of this film, is that like he's not good at being Batman yet, but anytime like for example, when he's escaping the police department, he flies down, and I love the tactility of that he has this sort of like break in case of emergency squirrel suit, that it's not like Christopher Nolan where he can just glide everywhere with like an electrified cape. He has to essentially base jump out of the situation, and I love that aspect of it. And then he opens his chute too late, and he completely eats shit when he falls, and that's like, it's a really funny moment, but it doesn't actually turn into an obstacle or a problem. He still makes good his escape. And the same thing happens like when he fires up the Batmobile, he floods the engine and the Batmobile stalls, which is just a really funny moment, but then he still gets it to cooperate and he catches up with the Penguin 10 minutes later. And it's just one of those things where like, I talk about the Mission Impossible movies a lot because I think they're just like perfect blockbuster narrative economy. I think they're like the gold standard for what blockbuster movies can be. And those movies have really only gotten better with age because they acknowledge the fact that Tom Cruise and by extension Ethan Hunt have lost a step. And in those movies, they use that to create new obstacles and new narrative momentum. Like, he fucks this up, therefore they have to try plan B, but they don't really have a great plan B, so they have to build plan C while the plane is in the air. And every time this movie presents something kind of subversive like that, they resolve it pretty much within the same scene. It's just like, yeah, he eats shit on his base jump, but he still just kind of dusts it off and we're on to the next scene. Or his Batmobile stalls out, but he still catches him in a thrilling car chase. And I just wish they would lean into the, like, he sucks at this of it all.
Yeah, there's a weird thing where they have Batman on kind of a gradient of invincibility, which you can't really have, right? Like, invincibility is a binary question, either you are or you aren't. But they want to have it both ways, where he's like vulnerable and can fail and be hurt, but not really. Anytime he's vulnerable or fails and is hurt, he's okay anyway. And it's that, you're right, that and like the thematic kind of myopia that takes over some scenes, between those things and like the nature of the riddles taking too long, all that stuff, it just makes this movie take way longer than it has to. And like, that's one of the frustrating things with this movie, is that there are moments in this movie that make it very clear that Matt Reeves can do the thing that is what filmmaking is, which is basically an exercise in emotional manipulation. Like, Matt Reeves can make you think and feel the thing Matt Reeves wants you to think and feel in various moments in this movie. It is very clear that he has the technique and capacity for doing that, but is not doing it throughout the entire movie. And there are parts where things like we're discussing right now kind of are exactly what blow that from working. Like, there's some scenes in this movie that are fucking masterfully done. And then it's just sort of like, there are other scenes where it's like, why did we do that?
What's one of your favorites? What's one of your favorite scenes in the movie? I feel like we're coming out hot, but I did like a lot of this movie.
Yeah, I liked a lot of it. I really enjoyed just the opening part where it's showing the different criminals, even though they're kind of silly criminals, and it's showing them as though they're in a horror movie, like looking around corners or reacting to sounds. Sure. Puts us in a really good, like, here comes the Batman stuff. I loved that. I loved Bruce and the Riddler in Arkham. I thought that scene was really great. Also, the action scene where the gunfight shots are lighting up the hallway.
It's a really like a
very
well-conceived sequence. That's really cool.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, like, the movie is really proud of that scene, and a lot of times when movies are really proud of a scene, I'm like, fuck off. But this time it's like, no, you earned it. Like, you should be really proud of that scene. That shit is
the Batmobile chase, that I brought up. Like, I think this movie is very intentionally funny throughout. Like, I think there's some really good stuff like that. But I also like that. In the Christopher Nolan movies, the Batmobile is essentially like a tank. It's a weapon in a way. But in this movie, the Batmobile is like a fucking demon, and I just like I like the menace of it. I like that they're not fetishizing the car. It's just noise and shadow and fire, and like you fucking hear it coming before you see it, and then it bursts through a wall of flame, and Colin Farrell is just like stuck upside down. It is like a horror movie. He's just watching Doom just fucking scream towards him. I like so much of this movie and there are so many of these sequences that like individually feel fucking brilliant, that it's really frustrating that it still feels weighed down. It feels like it can't achieve like escape velocity.
Yeah, I kind of thought too that like I enjoyed the car scene, the chase scene, because it kind of felt like, you know, the old car chase scenes, you know, like obviously it was big explosions and things like that, but it did have like a real sort of tangible physicality to it that I thought was really kind of nice. That you know, Tarantino, when he was making like his car chase scenes, what is it, like Death Proof, yeah, where he was like, you know, this is like a shout out to like the old car chase scenes from like the 70s and shit like that.
My favorite Tarantino film.
Yeah, and I kind of felt that in this, that there were definitely some really cool, obvious, practical stunts that they did that were really kind of cool. So I actually really did enjoy the chase, even though it was prolonged, and I thought, okay, for some reason that sequence where they go to like bust the drug dealers and he runs into Selena Kyle and she like steals the money, that seems really kind of drawn out and long. And then the kind of build up where the car like kind of stalls and then it chases, like it just felt a little bit like okay, so I had an acting teacher once who used to say, when there's a great line, like especially like a punchline of a comedy line that you've got to land, he was Scottish and he said, don't squeeze your arsehole. And what he meant by that was just let it land. Like if it's well written, you don't need to overemphasize it. You don't need to wink kind of like, that's the... I felt like that this film far too often tried to stick every single landing and stick its arms up in the air like celebrate, you know? And I don't know, for me that kind of takes away from the dramatic tension a little bit, because then I get there and I'm like, okay, keep it moving, and it doesn't do that, you know?
Yeah, I can even think of a single scene, to go back to the base jumping scene, actually, that has that happen in it, because the crane shot from...
Hey guys, if you want to hear the rest of the conversation, make sure to find us on your podcast application of choice. And if you want to support Show Me the Meaning or Culture Binge, subscribe and then rate and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks as always for watching. I'll catch you later.